I'm Kat from the Wild Alaskan Company recipe team, and I will be cooking through not one, but two chowders today. So what this is actually one chowder recipe that I'm adapting to create a completely different chowder just by swapping out some key ingredients. This is really great if you are interested in learning how to make a basic chowder, and then from there, kind of getting more experimental if you like. So the first one's going to be maybe what you think of as a classic chowder, something New England style. The second one's going to be a little bit more influenced by Southeast Asian flavors. We're going to follow the recipe more or less, and this is going to make a creamy New England style of chowder. We're going to swap out some ingredients for really fun and easy changes that creates a very different dish. And this should work pretty seamlessly with this basic recipe that we have. So we've got some extremely well caramelized onions here and carrots. I wanted to get this started because these take a little bit of time, but turns out I turned my back for a little too long. It's okay because these are still edible to my eye. So basically, to start a chowder, both of these pots had some nicely cooking onions, which you can still recognize here. I used a yellow onion. We got carrots. So this is kind of like our version of mirepoix, which is carrot, onion, and celery. You actually don't want to get them caramelized / nearly burnt like this. These are very tasty as they are. I mean, I would have this sprinkled onto something because I love the taste of really browned onions, but you want to make sure that the onions stay nice and soft and become this like sweet translucent color. Once they start to brown, even on like a lower level than what I have done today, they're gonna pick up a toasty flavor. And it's not a bad thing, but we're looking for a nice sweetness and juices in here. So, that being said, this is completely salvageable. It's not burnt to, it's kind of burnt to a crisp on this side. This side's a little bit lighter, but we're just gonna have a little extra flavor and color to these now that they've cooked down for a little bit. What I'm gonna add to this pot here is sort of the New England version of chowder ingredients. So this is kind of what you're going to be adding in here eventually. For the other side, we're going to add in a different mix of ingredients. We've got dill, ginger, garlic, rather than the bay leaf and parsley and thyme for the other one. So for this pot, let's go ahead and add in some fresh thyme. Dried thyme works as well. And then for the other one, we're going to add in some ginger. And then I will bravely turn these back on so we can start hearing that sizzle again. All right, I'm going to put these on over medium heat, should be good. All right, so we got medium heat for both sides. And we just want to maybe add a little bit more oil considering these are burnt. Actually, initially on this side, I had a coconut oil to get it started. That's running low. And then on the other side, I had some butter. Well, it turns out these are both healthy, so now they're both gonna have butter. And I'm just adding a little more fat here because a lot of it has gotten into the onions that are now extra crisp. Basically made some caramelized onions by mistake, and they've soaked up all of that delicious fat. So this side, just butter. This side has a little bit of coconut oil to get started, and then just adding butter now because that was what was within reach. You really can mix and match the kind of fats that you're using for these. If you're doing something that's a New England style chowder, it's okay to use olive oil or whatever fat you have in your pantry. And then for this other version, the Southeast Asian inspired one, I liked using coconut oil because it adds a hint of that coconut flavor, but adding a little butter is fine. You can use olive oil, you can use, avocado oil if that's what you have. Adding a little bit of nuance, butter has its own flavor. Coconut oil, of course, has its own flavor too. So whatever you have on hand is pretty much what you should be using here. Of course, if you have some bacon, that's a good source of fat as well, but this is a baconless recipe for today anyway. The next thing that's going to go in here is garlic for both. I'm adding in the garlic now because garlic is very much prone to burning, more so than what we see here with my onions. Garlic really only needs about a minute to cook. You'll know it's sort of done cooking once it releases a really nice fragrance. It'll become that delicious garlicky smell in your kitchen without, picking up too much color. It'll just start to soften. So Smells delicious. And it's interesting to be making these at the same time because I smell the fresh thyme in this pot while also smelling really delicious ginger aroma here. I feel like my brain is confused on what I'm making, but really, really fragrant, really aromatic in here. Gonna be delicious both sides. So it'll be interesting to taste these later with all the really fragrant aromas in the air. Now that the garlic has started to soften a little bit, what we're gonna do is add in, on this side, bay leaf and smoked paprika. The smoked paprika is gonna add a really nice, and that is a great way to omit something like bacon while kind of maintaining that really nice, nutty, smoky, savory heat and warmth that you would get from adding something like bacon. On the other side, all I'm going to add is some curry powder. I forget what kind of curry powder this is. I think this is possibly a Madras style curry powder. Whatever you have at home, even a curry paste would do well. There really are no wrong answers here. So delicious. If you are using a curry powder, just make sure to keep in mind whether or not it has salt. If you're adding the powder to a pot like this, then you'll just want to adjust the salt accordingly. I believe this mix is without salt, but I'll just double check that later once I start giving this a taste. Next up, we're going to add some potatoes. I've got these really cute little tiny potatoes here, so no chopping required. If you wanted, you could cut a larger potato into quarters, just pieces of potato that you would like to see on your spoon. And next thing, you're gonna add water to both and give that a little bit of a stir. So I just added about 2 cups of water to both of these pots. We're getting some nice color from the curry powder on this side, the smoked paprika on this side, plus some of that color from the burnt onions. So this is going to be a very, very rich, flavorful chowder either way. I'm going to go ahead and bring these to a boil first. So I'm just raising the heat right now. And after that, we can lower it to a simmer just so that the potatoes cook really gently. So let me just adjust the dials here a little bit. Once these start bubbling, I can go ahead and turn down the heat, but we'll just bring them up to speed right now. So today I used water to create the base for the chowder, but if you wanted, you could use something like stock. I think that's a really good option if you just happen to have some ready in your fridge or the freezer. I didn't today. You could use something like bouillon, like I love like better than bouillon, whisked with some water. That's a really good option as well. But while these are getting up to speed, what I'd actually love to show you is how to make a really easy spot prawn stock. So surprise recipe mixed in here. What I have here is just one portion or one package worth of spot prawn shells. So this is what I'm going to make into a really quick prawn stock. And, you know, this is something that I can save for later. But what I'm going to do with this is bring my pot here in the back, put that over medium heat. There we go. Add some oil in there if I have any left in this jar here. There we go. So we've got a little bit of olive oil. Again, any oil is fine. I would probably avoid using butter for this one because of how long the prawn shells are going to be frying in there. But once this gets a little hot, with my medium flame, I'm going to just add the shells into here. And shortly, they should start sizzling. And what we're doing when we're building a prawn stock like this, you can also do this with side striped shrimp shells, by the way. We're going to create a really nice toasty flavor with these shells. There's like a lot of really good flavor trapped in the shells themselves, even little bits of meat that are left in the, you know what, I'm gonna switch places so you can see. There you go, that's probably better, right? So there's a lot of flavor trapped in the actual tails from when you're peeling the spot prawns or the side striped shrimp, and even just within the shells themselves. So once they start to become opaque and pick up a nice golden crisp appearance, that's when we can start adding in water to build a stock. So I don't know if you can hear that, but nice sizzly crisping noise happening here. For the chowder that we're working on, I'm going to lower the heat of this one because it's come up to a boil. This burner underneath this pot is a little bit bigger than the rest on the stove. So let me just look at my heat here. the one in back, let me bring that to simmer. And these are just gonna hang out here for the next 10 minutes or so until the potatoes get really nice and tender. We want them to be pork tender before we add any fish and start finishing up the chowders. So for the prawn stock or shrimp stock, I like to give the shells a stir pretty frequently, partly to make sure they don't burn, and also just to make sure we get a nice even crisp all around. So as you can see, the shells start to become opaque. These start to pick up a really nice opaque appearance, and that's when some of these flavors are going to develop. To that, we can go ahead now and probably add some water. I'm adding about, I think this is a cup or two, and we'll go ahead and bring that to a simmer as well. It's just enough water to cover the shells, really. For a single pack of spot prawns, where you're peeling shell off of 8 ounces worth of prawns, you're probably only going to get maybe a cup and a half or maybe 2 cups of stock, but that's okay. That's enough to build something like a chowder like this and have a really nice complex layer of flavor underneath it. So if you wanted to make a bigger batch though, what I would recommend is hoarding your shrimp shells or spot prawn shells. Keep them in a zip top bag and stash them in the freezer. And then once you have, 2 to 4 packs worth, you can make a big pot of prawn stock to use for that day or stash that in the freezer once it's done for another day. But, I just wanted to show you how to make this really quickly here. It really only takes about 15 minutes, maybe 20 to make a prawn stock or a stock from shrimp shells. That's because we're not making something like a chicken stock or beef stock where you're pulling a lot of things out of what you have in the pot. With this, all the flavor is really readily accessible in the shells without much coaxing. You don't need to do a 2 or 3 hour simmer to get this nice and flavorful. So it's one of my favorite stocks to mix because it's so fast. And with the amount of spot prawns and side striped shrimp I have from Wild Alaskan Company, I always have plenty of stock to flavor things like soup. Something like grits would be a really good option for this as well. Or even just using a ladle full of a stock like this as the base of a sauce. Like something like making salmon piccata, instead of using white wine, you could use some shrimp stock and give it a different flavor. So I'll let that stock hang out for a little bit. And these are looking like they're at the perfect simmer. Let me switch spots again here. This is sort of that bubbling that you're looking for. Nothing too aggressive, and constantly just adjust the heat as needed so that you're getting a really steady simmer. Let me finish up this prawn stock. What we have with the prawn stock is, so I have this delicious mixture of shells. As you can see, there's a nice golden broth that's formed in here. So all we need to do now is, ideally don't do this in a metal bowl, but this is just what I have available because this is going to absorb all of the heat from that stock. But you just need to strain out the prawn shells. All of the flavor from that is in this delicious liquid now. And it smells so good. If you want to season it now, you can. It doesn't hurt to hold off to season it later, but I'm just going to give this a little bit of a taste right now to see if it's tasting strong enough or too strong. It's not going to be an overwhelming flavor because the taste of spot prawns is so sweet. So all of that sweetness has gone into this broth itself, just creating a little more complexity and nuance for whatever you end up using it for. Since there's so little broth in here, I'm just going to pour a little bit of this into both chowders. Doesn't hurt to top these off. Since I have halved the recipe, my pots were a little wide, so half the potato is sticking out, but we'll bring this back to boil on both sides, and I can check the doneness of the potatoes here. I see there was one that was starting to split open, so I think that's a good sign. And what you're looking for in terms of doneness is fork tender. So these are still a little bit hard, probably because I had them half out of the broth. So I'm going to let those cook for a little bit longer. But what I can do now is start to season the actual mixtures that we're creating in here. So I haven't added any salt yet. Now would be a good time to do this, pretty much at any stage along the way. tasting delicious, if not a little bit toastier than normal. But I'm gonna just guess based on my experience of salting things that this is a good start here for both of them. I think I added maybe a teaspoon and a half or so for what I'm doing right now. And the smokiness of the smoked paprika in here has really come through. It's really so savory, so delicious. It doesn't have that heaviness of cooking with bacon, but it has all of that complexity and nuance. For this one, I'll give this a taste and see how this is going. Actually, this would be a great recipe to add in some fresh chili or red chili flake if you like a little spice. I think my curry powder has a little bit of spice in it, so I opted out of that. But depending on what you're using, you can add a little more heat, a little more curry powder, just give it extra flavor if that's, up your alley, if you want something really intense. And every curry powder is going to be different. So when you see any recipe that calls for a tablespoon of curry powder, let's just say that, you do want to just adjust accordingly depending on your palate and what mixture you're using, because there are a million different kinds of mixes. So it's not one size fits all. You really want to have this be a dynamic experience when you're cooking something, even like a basic chowder. So while the potatoes are cooking, I guess what I can say is we're going to add in the next ingredient soon, and it's frozen corn, just straight out of the bag, straight out of the freezer, in fact. Probably won't use, I'll see if I feel like using all of this. Corn is, I think, a really good feature of any chowder. That being said, if it's not traditional to you, if you don't like corn, you can leave it out. But I really like that this adds just like little cozy pieces of vegetable into the mix. And it adds like a little bit of a sweetness as well. As a bonus, having corn from the summertime or just from the grocery store, whatever you have in your freezer, it's going to be ready for you whenever you feel like cooking. So it's one less vegetable to buy because you have something that's ready to go straight into the pot. These are already, actually most vegetables that you have in your freezer are going to be blanched and par cooked already. So it's really just a matter of them heating up. And these are so small that once they hit the broth, they're going to defrost very quickly. It's not going to really add much more cook time to what you're making here. So let's see. Creamy ingredients for what we're making here. For the New England style, we're going to add in some heavy cream, but we're going to stir it in right at the end. And we're going to stir it in at the end so that it cooks and integrates really gently in here, especially because we don't have a roux or thickening agent. We just want to limit how much this is going to kind of separate into the milk solids and milk fats, or butter fats, I guess. So we're going to add that in at the end, and it'll become a really nice creamy chowder. For the other side, we're going to add in a can of coconut milk. And that's going to really bring it over the top with that Southeast Asian influence. And then you're going to see these transform into really rich looking creamy dishes. So let me see how these potatoes are doing. Well, they're still they're not quite as tender as I would like them to be, but for the sake of time, let me just make sure it's still edible, if not as tender as I want it to be. For the sake of time, I'll probably just go ahead and add the cream and coconut milk now, but more than edible. It took a little bit of pressure to put the fork or like the tip of a knife into the potato, but these are tender enough for me to go ahead and move on. Cook the potatoes as long as you can stand, as long as you like. Might take 10 to 20 minutes, depending on how small you cut the potatoes and depending on the actual type of potato as well. These should be good to go. All right, coconut milk, I'm gonna stir into here. Maybe I'll do a whole can for this side. And that looks so beautiful right now. This is just going to come up to temperature really gently. I might raise the heat a little bit here. So that's the Southeast Asian chowder with coconut milk added. I did a full can. For the other side, I'm going to add in a bit of heavy cream. So it's not going to need much. Actually, it's funny. I had this heavy cream in the freezer, so I'm a little curious to see how it's going to act in this chowder. Oh, it looks fine. I did try whipping some heavy cream the other day that was previously frozen, and that did not work, let me tell you. But if you ever have heavy cream left over, it looks like it integrates perfectly for something like chowder. Normally this would have a much lighter appearance if I hadn't have burned the onions at first. But because it has that smoked paprika element in here, it's going to have a little bit of a nice toasty red sheen as well. So when you're making this recipe, it'll look a little bit lighter than this, but not too far off. And you can add really as much as you like. If you want it to be a little bit creamier, go for it. Probably added about 1/4 cup in here right now, just to mellow out some of that caramelized flavor. And it's tasting delicious. As for the coconut milk side, let me give this a taste as well. I don't want either of these to burn or boil, so we're just going to lower the heat as far as we can on both sides so that they're a nice gentle simmer. And we just want the ingredients to integrate with the fats. Oh, yum. They're both really, really delicious, I must say. Especially the coconut milk side. I think that one's faring better, even though the onions were a little more burnt. But these will hang out here for a little bit. What we can do now is add I think it's time to add the corn. Yeah, let's do it. Corn is going in. I'll just kind of estimate here. Seems like a good amount. And I'll have a little bit left for another meal. These will heat up slowly but surely. In the meantime, if there are any sort of final taste adjustments that you want to add to these dishes, I have a secret, not a secret ingredient. I like using fish sauce if you happen to have some, because that adds a really nice flavor of umami, that super savory, satisfying taste. I'm just going to add very little of that to the Southeast Asian chowder side of my kitchen. And this is going to add a really nice pungent, savory background note. A little goes a long way, and that's perfect to me. On the other side, you could use these interchangeably, honestly. If you have something like Worcester sauce, this actually, I don't know if you know this, contains anchovies. So while it's not a fish sauce per se, there is fish in here. And this is also going to add a little bit of that kind of pungent, savory flavor that adds a little more complexity to the dish. If you don't have Worcester sauce or fish sauce, you could leave both of those ingredients out, but I think they're really nice additions to help round out the flavors in the pot, especially if you're building this from water rather than a super complex stock. So those, add them to your taste if you have them and if you feel like it. It really, really brings the chowder to life. So the corn is heating up, but what we can also do is add in our seafood. So let me switch my camera again. I'm going to add these to the right pots. Not that there's any wrong answers. All my spot prawns are going to go in my Southeast chowder, and then my Northeast New England chowder is going to get the cod. So these are just going to poach really gently in this hot liquid. We're going to have the pots going at a very bare simmer. They're probably a little bit, we're just trying to catch up to the heat of the corn. So I'll let those hang out here, but as you can see, maybe the cod is already starting to become opaque without really any bubbles in the pot right now. So this will take maybe 5 minutes at the most. You don't want to boil the fish or boil the prawns at this point, because that'll just make the texture a little more tough. Even though this is a soup, we want to try to keep as much of that moisture in the seafood itself, so that you have a really nice experience when you bite into the little morsel of goodness. The other thing that I think goes really well with a Southeast Asian chowder, that is a bit of lime. So I have some fresh lime here. I'll just give a little bit of a squeeze into the coconut milk version of this chowder. You don't usually want to add something like lemon or lime to like a dairy version. So that's the only thing that is not mix and match, because it'll cause it to curdle and create essentially something like a buttermilk, unless you're using it in very small doses. So there's that. Let me ladle some of this out because we are about ready. Ooh, actually, final touches for the Southeast Asian chowder. I'm adding in some dill, but cilantro or what's the other ingredient I like using? Scallions are a really good option for this New England style side. Actually, I think dill would have been a really delicious herb to use in here as well, but I'm going to use parsley to kind of differentiate the flavors. Give that a stir right at the end. These are really tender, fresh green herbs, so they don't really need to cook. They're going to have a really nice pure flavor just when you add them to the pot here at the end. So let me move my pot of New England chowder here. Got my Southeast Asian chowder. I wish you could smell all of this amazing flavor that is happening here. And we've got ladle. Do maybe 2 of each for myself. For the other chowder, you can pick out the bay leaf and thyme leaves. I just threw in my thyme whole, so it's easy to pick out. But what you could also do is chop those leaves when you add them to the pot so that you have a nice fine texture in there. Oh, yum. All right, we've got prawns, cod, and my spoon. Give this a little bit of a test here. All right, well, the prawn was perfectly tender. I'm afraid of the potato, but delicious. And my potato is beyond al dente now, perfectly tender and breaking down in my hand, which is the texture I was hoping for. Delicious. And the cod, just not to be overshadowed by the spot prawns here, is nice and hot and steamy. 2 thumbs up, well, 2 fingers up for both. 2 thumbs up. So 4 fingers up for both. All of this is so delicious. We had a little hiccup at the beginning, but it did not prevent these chowders from becoming so flavorful and really cozy for a day like this. If you're living someplace where it's negative however many degrees, I wish I could share this with you right now. With that, I think that's it for today. Join us next week. We are hosting an event called Welcome to Cooking Wild Seafood. It's what I like to call a new member orientation, but everyone's welcome to come. We're covering all of the basics, tips, tricks, essentials for making seafood a really delicious and fun part of your everyday lifestyle and recipe rotation. So if you haven't come to one of those yet, I highly recommend it. We'll start from how to thaw seafood the right way to some of my favorite pantry staples that I like to keep. Thank you so much for being here. I will say goodbye now and live wild, everybody. Stay warm, stay cozy.